A concept, I know.
Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing a feminist reading vlog. Alright, before you get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what is your favorite unlikable female character. For another year, I decided to celebrate International Women's Day by reading some feminist books, and this is one of my favorite videos to film every year because most of the time I tend to find books I really love. Really, the only thing tying these books together is that they discuss feminist themes in some way, shape, or form. These kind of run the gambit a little bit. In previous years, I have done a fiction as well as a nonfiction book, but honestly, I just really wanted to focus on nonfiction books this year. And I actually ended up going with 3 instead of 2. Obviously, from my intro, I think you can guess that Unlikable Female Characters by Bogtuskaya was one because, I mean, I couldn't not pick this book up here soon. This one is focusing on the women pop culture wants you to hate. As the little blurb on the back says, how bitches, train wrecks, shrews, and crazy women have taken over pop culture and liberated women from having to be nice. Specifically, this is looking at characters from film and TV shows, and I'm so excited, especially with the rise of unlikable characters lately. I think this is going to be especially fascinating to look at, and I'm hopeful that I will know most of the pop culture pieces that she is referencing, and that if I don't, there'll be a little bit of explanation there. Next is one that's actually been on my TBR for a hot minute, and I've been wanting to get to it, but it's going to be a very academic text, and so I know it's going to be dry and a bit of a slog. Plus, it's on the older side. However, I'm really hopeful I can pull some really good nuggets of information from this book, and that is The Beauty Myth by Naomi, how images of beauty are used against women. It is a topic that I am already a little bit well versed in when it comes to communication studies, and I'm really intrigued to see how this pairs with my own knowledge. It is from the 90s, so it's on the older side. However, one way or another, I'm very excited for this one and to finally dive in. It is a academic text, and you can see it is quite dense. This will probably take me a little bit to work through. We'll see how that goes. Finally is one that I couldn't pass up because it was just too perfect an opportunity. Divine Might by Natalie Haynes. Seeing as how Pandora's Jar, which kind of does similar things, but is focusing on the mortal women from Greek myths, and that was my favorite book of last year, I had to take this opportunity to read one that hopefully might be a favorite book of this year. In comparison to Pandora's Jar, which as I said focused on mortal women in Greek myths, this one is going to be focusing on the goddesses. In Pandora's Jar, I really loved how Haynes looked at the multiple different showcasing of the characters from different stories. She also looks at how these women were depicted in the art pieces of those times, how the society responded to those stories, as well as the impact those women and their portrayals had on media today. And I'm so excited to see her do that again with the goddesses. So excited for these books. Once again, I love that I started the tradition of doing this video because it gives me an excuse to pick up a bunch of feminist texts that I know will get me heated, but also passionate about the topics. So I will talk to y'all whenever I have officially started into one of these 3. Hey guys, so you can make plans for a video, but they don't always stay true. Because I was originally reading The Beauty Myth by Naomi. Absolutely thought this would be perfectly up the alley for feminist discussions and commentary, but this was a really fast fail. When I started this, I did not anticipate that the author was going to write and sound like a conspiracy theorist. After looking up Naomi and learning that apparently she is a COVID denier and an anti-vaxxer, kind of makes perfect sense. From the get-go, there's just this feeling that she keeps reinforcing. Men are to blame for all of these images that influence women. The reasoning behind all of it is to keep women down and in their place within society. It's a way to control them. The idea that she is posing with this makes it seem like every guy on earth is having this secret meeting once a month to figure out a new way to keep women down. It's just so extreme and ridiculous. I had a really hard time keeping a straight face with it. There was a small amount of blame pointed towards capitalism, which is something I'm more in line to agree with, but it was really quickly swept under the rug. And the biggest shame about that fact is that I already had a good few nuggets of wisdom in this book that I really agreed with, I really liked. I thought it reinforced the ideas I had and, were more realistic. But everything surrounding those made this a very difficult read. On the whole, this book is just really overwritten. It felt like she was trying to come across as really academic, but it was way too verbose, and at the same time really convoluted. There are a lot of studies and statistics that are tossed around in this book. Already, I was like 60 pages in, and I found 2 really serious claims that she didn't source in the back. So that right there, giant red flag for me. And then another one that also was a pretty serious claim, when I tried to look up the source she had on it, I couldn't find anything for it. Just reinforced the previous red flag. I did go into this also having already heard some critiques around the author's viewpoints and the lack of diversity in her discussions. And I almost immediately saw that blind spot as well. After the introductory chapters, the first main chapter is talking about work, women in the workplace, and how beauty standards are utilized there. Many of the claims that were brought up in that chapter, I think, would have had more impact and also possibly more validity if race of the women impacted was brought up as well. And obviously, like, I can't fully blame Naomi Wolf for that because she isn't actually the one conducting these studies. She is just utilizing the information there. But I do think that would have been an important piece to bring up in her commentary, and I think the lack of that showcases her own biases. Really bummed that this was such a freaking dud, but yeah, this was not nearly as great a read as I was hoping for, so it'll probably be returning to half-price books. On that note, I decided to go ahead and pick up Unlikable Female Characters by Anna Bogtuskaya. 2 chapters in. I am loving this. Starting at the top, Bogtuskaya discusses what it means to be unlikable, the double standard that is often utilized when audiences see a unlikable female character versus a unlikable male character. She also gives a very limited summary over the last 100 years when it comes to film and cinema and the showcasing of female characters throughout those 100 years and how their role has changed. She does talk about the initial interest in unlikable female characters whenever the motion pictures producers and distributors of America got involved, how they created this code that sort of forced the viewing of characters, particularly unlikable characters, to go a certain way. I hate saying reinforce the agenda they had, but I mean, it is sort of true. Unlikable characters were forced to get their comeuppance at the end. They couldn't have a happily ever after. On one hand, I understand, but on the other hand, like, that's not always how real life is, and, you know, movies are supposed to be a reflection of real life. I also really enjoyed how she discusses the impact that these roles have on the actresses playing them and people's reactions to those actresses as well. In the first decade of the 21st century, women in the public eye were put on a pedestal, and pop culture made a business out of tearing them down. The naughties were a battleground for actresses whose off-screen identities blended with or contradicted their on-screen roles. And way before we started to reconcile just how ingrained this internalized misogyny really was, we relished any coverage of Britney Spears' mental health troubles. In comparison with the beauty myth, she acknowledges the lack of diversity and unlikable female characters already. It's a flawed formula that's rooted in bias, and the history of pop culture has shown us who's allowed to be perceived as difficult, unruly, or unlikable and get away with it. This is exactly what I was wanting. And now I've officially finished out the first chapter, which is talking about a specific character archetype that is a unlikable female character, the bitch. She uses many examples from different movies from the early 30s to now, reclaiming of the character of the bitch, whether it's a bad thing or a good thing, and the depth that is allowed there. She even had some very poignant commentary on a character that I think a lot of people love, but also love to hate, which is Miranda Priestley from The Devil Wears Prada.
Sure. No. That wasn't a question.
Where for most of the movie, she is completely unforgiving, but in the one circumstance where you finally see her weak, it is due to the fact that she has failed as a wife. And it talks about the dangers of equating the fact that being ambitious means that you won't have a happy home life. Highly recommend. The next chapter I am on to is The Mean Girl, which I think is perfect, seeing as how the new Mean Girls movie just recently came out. So I definitely feel like there's going to be a resurgence and discussions around that character. Hi guys, so I have read further into unlikable female characters, continuing to absolutely adore it. So the ones I read were the mean girl, the angry woman, and those kind of go hand in hand together, but they're handled in different ways. And it was interesting to see the parallels, but also the contrasts. Then there's the slut and the train wreck, and sort of the same situation there. Something I love that this author has been doing with each of the archetypes is she kind of gives you a historical basis for where these archetypes were originally seen, and then she'll talk about how they have evolved over time. In different pieces of media, they kind of become the quintessential representation
representation of that character. When I last talked to y'all that for the mean girl, I was assuming it was obviously going to be talking about the Tina Fey movie. Unsurprisingly, it did. There's actually this one section that is literally verbatim a scene from Mean Girls.
One time, she punched me in the face. It was awesome.
Something I did think was really cool was talking about how this archetype is so often showcased in high school pieces. It's only within the highly structured world of high school that we can explore the extremes of human emotion, backstabbing, and seemingly immense stakes, all while not actually risking all that much. She also brought up another one of my absolute favorite movies, Heathers. A really important element is how she feels about her reputation. And in Heathers, by the end of it, Veronica doesn't care about her reputation anymore. It's so insignificant to her in the grand scheme of everything she's experienced in the movie.
Veronica, you look like hell. Yeah, I just got back.
And seeing as how we are tying into the resurgence of unlikable female characters in pop culture today, she talks about with the TV show Sex Education and the two main mean girl characters in there. So much more nuance and interest to the characters when they're more well layered and there's a reasoning behind why they act that way. The next chapter was The Angry Woman, which something I loved was a lot of the commentary going on in this chapter I could easily tie to Mayfly by C.J. Lead, which also had some really interesting commentary about unlikable female characters and killer characters who are women and how often it is due to some traumatic thing they've experienced. That is why they are mean, that's why they're angry. Sometimes it's much more interesting if that isn't there. The specific piece of media she talked about that I really enjoyed was Promising Young Woman. I think that is a fantastic movie, although it does have some issues, but the way it is handled is just so clever and subverts what you're expecting from it. Another thing I really loved with this chapter was talking about the showcasing of female anger and how so often it is utilized to undermine a woman because she's being too emotional. But when a man shows his anger on screen, it's a way to further prove his point. Something I really liked that she brought up was who gets to be the angry woman. That unfortunately the role of an angry black woman is seen as playing too much into the stereotype. Or if a Latina woman were to play angry, then it could lean too much into the stereotype of like being spicy. Versus a Asian woman, it could lean into the dragon lady persona. How that has come about in pop culture and what's been reinforcing it, but also how now we're starting to push against that and allowing these characters to have more nuance. A, having better representation, but B, pushing against those stereotypes that are rooted in racism. Now, finally, the last two were the slut and the train wreck. For the slut, that one specifically, I would say the biggest person she discussed was Samantha from Sex and the City, which I've actually never watched Sex and the City. This chapter in particular, the thing I really loved was talking about having that agency over your own body. Important, but at the same time can so easily be turned into a negative thing and used to take away respect. That element is also talked about in the train wreck, how oftentimes train wreck characters are also pretty free with their sexuality, and that's a element of showcasing them as, you know, immature and childish. Train wrecks never live to see a happy ending, and they make everyone else uncomfortable in the process. But again, with some of these pieces of media she is referencing, they're pushing against that and showcasing once more the emotional depth that is available to explore with the train wreck character. Fascinating that literally the underlying point in this book is just treat female characters as having the exact same amount of depth as male characters have for years now. And it allows for audiences to connect with these characters more and makes for more entertaining media. A concept, I know, is devouring it. The next chapter I have is The Crazy Woman, and one of the little quotes she has to introduce it is from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which I loved that TV show. Hey y'all, so I officially finished out Unlikable Female Characters. The 4 final archetypes we talked about was the crazy woman, the psycho, the shrew, and the weirdo. With the crazy woman, I was most excited for some discussions around Rebecca Bunch from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
She's the coolest girl in the world. Wait, wrong, Rebecca.
That show sort of subverts the crazy woman trope, which is something I do love about it. One of the big ones she had to talk about that originally sort of started the showcasing of this character archetype is Glenn Close and Fatal Attraction, which makes absolutely perfect sense.
What am I supposed to do? You won't answer my calls. You changed your number. I mean, I'm not going to be ignored, Dan.
The crazy woman, even the obsessive, is very, very tired. She is villainized for trying to fit into the mold she was told she needed to fit into, and in her own way, she's tired of being ogled but not seen. Another thing I really liked with this one was talking about how the crazy woman is so often portrayed as like a young, white, beautiful woman. Namely, two that she talked about that I was also really interested in when I was a teenager was Girl Interrupted and The Virgin Suicides. For both of those, the crazy woman characters are crazy because of their sadness when they have everything else going on in their lives that should ensure they aren't sad. And with that, she talks about the limitations of that representation. The troubling implication is that mental illness in women is only acceptable if it's beautiful, and a very specific type of beautiful at that, embodying a frail chicness that slots perfectly into the social narrative that white women must be protected at all costs, that their sadness can never be ugly, that crazy women are only crazy if they're not hot. However, she does talk about a character that kind of pushes against that narrative in recent years, Crazy Eyes from Orange is the New Black.
Before I met you, the sun was like a yellow grape.
I only watched like the first 3 seasons of that show, so I don't think I ever got the true depth of that character, but I appreciate the fact that now I know that did exist there. Then in the next chapter, talking about the psycho, I mean, how can you not talk about Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn? I'm not going to go into too many specifics there because she does spoil the movie / plot. I really found it fascinating how the women in this chapter all utilize the viewing society has on them as women as victims and turn that on its head. Right here was a perfect quote for it. A beautiful, smart, competent woman would never be the villain. She is too good to be a villain, too put together to be a psycho, but she could conceivably be a victim. For the shrew, I was over the moon when I saw that she was utilizing 10 Things I Hate About You, because I mean it is a retelling of The Taming of the Shrew by Shakespeare. It is also one of my favorite movies.
I guess in this society being male and an asshole makes you worthy of our time.
The daggers of nag or shrew or shill can be pulled out at any moment and for any reason because they merely define a woman who is speaking her mind, especially when she has the audacity to speak her mind in public. The next big one she talks about is Skylar White from Breaking Bad. And oh my God, like I still have yet to watch Breaking Bad just because I don't really have an interest in it. But even I know the amount of hate that character and actress gets. I literally saw comments on a Reddit thread yesterday hating on her. But the final one, the one that definitely made me feel seen, was the weirdo. The big ones she looks at is The Craft, Winona Ryder in Beetlejuice, and of course Wednesday Addams. But in particular, she's looking at Christina Ricci's portrayal of Wednesday Addams.
I'll be the victim.
All your life.
I love that with this one, she specifically connected it to the grunge aesthetic. And of course, I mean, it's hard not to connect it also with like goth alt culture. In particular with Wednesday, I love how she talked about the fact that yes, these characters are weirdos, they're also happy. And that is the important part, particularly for the Addams family. But the final one that I did agree with everything she was talking about, but I also had some qualms of it, but it's more from like a comic book standpoint, is Harley Quinn. Particularly Margot Robbie's representation of Harley Quinn. I love that she does talk about how over-sexualized she was in the first Suicide Squad movie. The boldness of Harley Quinn is that she genuinely won't sacrifice her inner happiness for other people's idea of her. Beneath the antics is a big heart. And that is something I do love about Harley's character. Again, I loved this. It was so good. I am gonna have a hell of a time cutting down all of my thoughts to fit into this vlog because I just have so many about this. I can see how people would have some issues with it. I do think there were a few like little editing errors I picked up on, but I couldn't not give this 5 stars. I just had such a phenomenal time reading it. Every single time I picked it up, I just did not want to stop. Please read this if it appeals to you in any way, shape, or form. Hey y'all, so I have dived into Dynamite by Natalie Haynes, and unsurprisingly, I am loving it. 4 chapters in. Started out obviously with just the introduction bits, and I really loved the discussions around art when it comes to the goddesses specifically and how they were presented, because they were initially done by men and the difference in how they're presented when women do them. She said, my point isn't that men create deficient art, it's that if we only have art created by men, we might want to bear that in mind when we respond to it. Starting out, the first goddesses she discusses are the muses, and what immediately made me know I was going to love this book is that she starts the chapter off by describing the introduction to the Hercules movie.
We'll take it from here, darling.
With the muses specifically, I really liked her commentary around how they're so often
not underutilized, what's the word? Underappreciated? Well, no, but yes. So often people don't really expect a lot from them, is what I'm trying to say. But in reality, she shows us time and time again that when somebody tries to cross the muses, when somebody tries to upstage the muses, it often ends pretty badly for them. From my experience with Haynes' prior book, Pandora's Jar, I knew she would take the commentary she has on these goddesses and twist it into commentary on today and the impact those stories have had, and how the muses are less personified but have become more of a inspiration that an artist has, and often they might find in somebody in their everyday lives. But the trope tends to be a male genius, such as Picasso, who literally described women as machines for suffering. If you didn't think he was a giant misogynist already, there you go. And once again, I just love how Haynes twists the original narrative around the muses to showcase how they have become objectified. But y'all, the next one, Hera, I was fascinated going into it because I just knew she was gonna have so much material when it came to Hera. As our Greek tour guide put it when we were in Olympia, Zeus was often a naughty, naughty boy. More often than not, Hera was obviously punishing the women because Zeus is her husband. Zeus is the king of the gods. She cannot punish him. So Hera has a reputation for not really being a girl's girl and for being the stereotypical angry wife, the ball and chain. But I loved how Haynes really gave Hera more personality in this chapter, how she really talked about the impact that that has on Hera and the lack of ability she also has to respond. I also loved how she talked about the ability for others to sort of use Hera as a scapegoat. If Hera is at large, you can behave as badly as you like and someone will probably blame her instead. Of course, with that chapter, there's tons of bits about female rage, which I was all over. Of course, that's definitely one of my go-to tabs so far. So I gotta say, this book has definitely made me appreciate Hera as a Greek goddess a lot more. The next chapter was Aphrodite. I do like how Haynes talked about that she is so often filled with laughter and so positive, even in the face of many of the terrible things she experiences. Not to say she's always a victim. Some of those she kind of does call upon herself. A few lines in particular I really liked when talking about her was, "There's something about Aphrodite that reminds me of women applying their lipstick in a war zone. You can't take away her game face. Make her your laughing stock and she will only make you want her more." The next chapter I have is Artemis, which I am also really excited to get to.
Hey y'all, so I have read further into Divine Might, and because I know that if I keep reading, my next update will be insanely long, that means I should probably just talk to y'all now. First off, we had Artemis, and I really liked what Haynes did in this chapter in particular because she sort of built up this character of Artemis that she has always envisioned, and also, I will admit, definitely fits the character I've created for myself, but then it twisted the narrative around it, and she actually has a little personal anecdote in which a friend of hers sort of did the same thing to her, and I really liked that. Once again, a goddess that it was very easy to showcase examples of her rage, especially when, for example, she brings up Agamemnon claiming to be as skilled a hunter as the goddess of hunting herself. That aspect of the story presented with Artemis more so as the focus in comparison to Clytemnestra from Pandora's Jar, Haynes' previous work that sort of did the same thing. I guess I should go into specifics for people who aren't like giant Greek retelling nerds like myself. That one was looking at the death of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra's oldest daughter, said to have been done as a sacrifice for Artemis, except it was very interesting. I didn't know this aspect of the story. Apparently, some stories actually say that whilst she is dying, all of the men look away. When they look back, her body has been replaced with a deer. Artemis didn't think that this young woman should be punished. In reality, her father was the one that needed to be punished. I find it very funny that as far as a modern representation, she went with Hawkeye.
And I have a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense.
And the TV show, specifically the passing of the mantle onto Kate Bishop. It made me laugh because she commented that usually people would probably compare Hawkeye to Artemis. There's a DC character literally named Artemis, so no, like first person in my brain is Artemis. That doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the similarities that were drawn there. Next up was Demeter's chapter, and with her in particular, it was unsurprising to me that the specific story looked at the most was Persephone's taking by Hades, the anger she has as a mother, and the punishment she rains down on Earth in response to Zeus and Hades being responsible for taking her daughter away. There's also lots of bits about Persephone as well. The significance in Demeter standing up against Hades and Zeus is pointed out in the fact that she actually wins. She gets what she wants, and that
that is such a rare thing for any Olympian to do, let alone any of the goddesses. She's so often thought to be the maternal figure, kindly, nourishing, protective, that we sometimes lose sight of the fact that her rage is terrifying, even to the gods, because it has such a wide repercussion given the fact that she is in charge of food. Lastly was Hestia, and I'll be honest, this is probably the goddess that I know least amount about. Haynes makes a point to say that at the beginning, that it's really hard to talk about Hestia because there is so little shown of her in the stories. In fact, even in art, a lot of the pieces she is thought to be showcased on, many of them have been destroyed in some way, shape, or form. Rather, her chapter really talks about the influence she has throughout many of stories, not really a specific role within the story. It is interesting though to see that she is probably one of the most benevolent gods. She does not offend many of the other Olympians, and she also does not take offense. Loving this book across the board. I have 2 or 3 chapters left. I have 𝗖cie and the Furies, and I am so excited. Hey guys, so I officially finished up Divine Might. Unfortunately, I was a little let down by the Athena chapter. That's not to say it wasn't still very interesting. I wasn't quite as ruthless on her as I was hoping, though Haynes definitely doesn't shy away from the fact that for being a woman who has promised to remain quote quote pure, she's very obsessed with Odysseus. I do like that the representation of her in many of the stories leaning onto the fact that she's a younger deity, and so sometimes when she interacts with some people, she comes across like a teenager. At the same time, she's one of those people who can like actually back up her bark with her bite. She does stand in the front line of battle. She encourages the Greeks. She gives superpowers to her favorite heroes. She is passionately involved in every ebb and flow of the fighting. I did also think it was kind of interesting in the aspects she chose to present of Athena and Zeus's relationship. It definitely seems like Athena is the daddy's girl who like has Zeus wrapped around her finger, but at the same time, like, he admits she is actually very wise. She's really smart, and sometimes he should bow to her thought process, but he is still king of the gods. Then the final chapter is focusing on the Furies. So there's a lot of female rage going on there, seeing as how the Furies are the goddesses that are supposed to get retribution, particularly when someone ends up committing heinous crime against a family member. Really liked how she talked about the tie-in of the Furies and their story with Clytemnestra's son, where they're trying to bring about punishment in response to him having killed his mother, and how that story kind of became the basis for justice being carried out by a jury of peers. That was one I don't think I actually knew. But anyway, in the end, across the board, I really enjoyed this one. There's definitely some things I wish would have been touched on a little bit. Every one of these I really liked. I learned something from all of them. But once again, I just really enjoy Haynes' presentation of these different myths. So though this wasn't quite perfect, it is still a very, very strong 4.5 star that I'm just honestly gonna round up to 5 star because I loved it still. And I, as a giant Greek mythology nerd, will once again be recommending her stuff to everyone. All right, y'all, and that is it for today. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me the dancing woman emoji in the comments. Also, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!